Good evening, everyone. On behalf of, thank you, the Museum Society of Mumbai and Cymroza Art Gallery, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all back once more to Cymroza. We're not in our normal venue at CSMVS because there's some renovations going on there, and we'll have to bear with the authorities for a little while longer. But we're delighted to be here. We used to have a lot of programs with the Museum Society when the museum had problems with space, etc. So I consider this another home, and I welcome you all here very, very warmly to what is going to be quite an enlightening evening. As you can see, a few of the photographs by Tejal Pandey. We are having an exhibition of hers, and in collaboration with Tejal and the curator, Mr. Ranjit Hoskote, we have arranged this evening, which is going to be a conversation between the artist, in this case the photographer, the curator, and a delightful moderator. I'll start with the artist. Tejal has done a magnificent job of pouring her heart out. What we have up here is just a small fraction of her work on images, near and far, intimate and distant. These are images that she has taken not from her professional life as a photojournalist, but just out of sheer love for the subjects she's seen around her in the city, beyond the city in India, and even across the shore, outside the shores of India, in other lands of Spain and Greece and the US. So I'm delighted that we've made this cross-section of work. It's been quite a leap of faith. She was as nervous as I was because this is her first public exhibition of her photographs, which is outside her everyday life. She's worked for the Times of India, she's worked for Verve, she's worked for Time Out, and several other publications, Condé Nast publications. So Tejal, I'm really delighted to welcome you to Cymroza once more this evening. Along with Ranjit Hoskote, who curated this show. It's not easy to go through thousands, I would really say hundreds and hundreds of images and select these 27. I'm not going to speak about those 27 images and why they were selected. Everyone knows Ranjit has a very critical, eagle eye, and I wouldn't expect anything less from my friend, who is really a cultural theorist. Those two words mean a lot to me. I'm sure they mean a lot to you in the audience as well. And it's not an easy act when you're looking at culture from across the globe and applying a critical theory to it. It's really critical thinking on Ranjit's part, which we value and appreciate, and he brings that to this exhibition as well. And we couldn't have found a better person to moderate the show than Shivani, Mutatkar, Sambhare. Welcome, Shivani. Shivani is the art insider. It's a formidable background, and I don't want to miss a word of it. So if you give me just 2 minutes of your time, which is not the best justice that I could give to Shivani, but it will set the tone of what you're going to see this evening. As you all know, she is an arts professional based in Mumbai, India, and the founder of The Art Insider. What is The Art Insider? Those people who are very tech-savvy, and all our members are not so tech-savvy, so may I enlighten you a little bit. It stands at the confluence of art education and art collecting, with the aim to encourage a new generation of art patrons to foster a deeper connection with the arts. At the center of the practice is a full service of the art industry as an advisory that works at both ends of the art ecosystem with independent collectors, designers, and architects, empowering them to develop thoughtful and dynamic art collections as well as with independent artists and artisans across the country to bridge the gap between art makers and the art patron. I was asked recently, has the world of art collecting and art patronage changed in the last few years? I said it radically has changed. When I started out in 71, we didn't have so much of a focus on art patron, but it's a community that has grown around us because it necessitated us to have patronage, contemporary patronage, not the traditional patronage that we're all used to. And I'm very glad that the Art Insider has carried this group of citizenry along, and through education, which is the most important thing for me, shown them how you could have an eye which is critical, appreciative, enjoyable, and something that you can walk home with, which will give you happiness as you view it on your walls, either in your home or in your place of work, as the case may be. So to bridge the gap between the art makers and the art patrons, I think it was a niche that Shivani has filled with the Art Insider. It also helps collectors to develop a sustained interest in the arts. Shivani has worked with galleries and institutions across the country to build conversations around art through exhibition walkthroughs, studio visits, and conversations with art professionals. So, the modern and the contemporary of Indian art comes to you this evening, and we support new age practices such as photography and digital art at Cymroza. It was our, sort of in our DNA, that we have to look for new people, new talent, new genres, new subjects, and I hope that we've succeeded in a small way in the last 3 exhibitions. Maybe Ranjit will touch upon it, on photography, as we bring you the 3rd in the series. So may I, on behalf of the Museum Society of Bombay and Cymroza Art Gallery, welcome Tejal, Shivani, and Ranjit to the platform. And I'm not going to stand between you all. Thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Thank you. And we'll say it with some flowers.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you Mrs. Godrej for that introduction, and also for giving us this platform to have conversations on art and photography, and welcome to my panel. I want to just, dial back a little bit and maybe start with you, Ranjit, if I may. I remember the first exhibition that took place at Cymroza, which, a couple of years ago after the long hiatus, which, painted this picture of the gallery as a space for contemporary art and culture to come together. And it's particularly interesting that the series of exhibitions that, has taken place in the gallery in the last 3 installments has been on photography. So that's really my starting point to understand why photography, and also, just from your curatorial practice perspective, what is so exciting to you about photography and curating it?
Thanks so much. Is this working? Great. Let me begin with this moment that you spoke of. It was a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the foundation of Cymroza. So it seemed like a good moment to look back in retrospective mode and to look forward in a more prospective way to see what the gallery might do next. So the 3 exhibitions that formed that constellation, which celebrated the 50th anniversary, were really looking at various aspects of what this practice has meant. So here at Cymroza, we actually had the Cymroza Chronicles, which was a survey of the contributions made by the gallery, which was really, in our account, and this is empirically verifiable, it was a bridge institution between the world of Ibrahim Al-Qazi, Mulk Raj Anand, all of those pioneers of modernism in various ways in Bombay, and the world of the commercial galleries that is more familiar to viewers today. So we really wanted to retrieve aspects of Cymroza's work, particularly from the 70s and 80s, when it acted as a platform not only for the visual arts, but also for discourse, for cinema, for theater, for music, for all kinds of arts. It really was, in effect, a multi-arts center. Yeah, so that was one. Then, of course, there was Firoza and Jamshed Godrej's private collection, which has strong links and affinities with the gallery practice. So that was celebrated at Pandol. And then Nancy Adjania curated Nellie Setner's retrospective, close to forgotten artist, a textile artist and a researcher into the crafts, who also had been shown and presented here in the Cymroza context. So these were the energies we wanted to take forward into the next phase, because it's a big question, what happens after that milestone of 50 years. So we really wanted to celebrate the fact that Firoza's heart has always been in the new, the underregarded. So whether it was printmaking or photography or ceramics, Cymroza was always hospitable to these forms, which is how we came to this moment of doing a cycle of exhibitions of photography, which, although it is very salient as an art practice, for some reason, still tends to be seen as secondary to a mythic notion of painting, which still acts as a kind of a phantom at the top of the hierarchy of the arts.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that in a little bit and get Tejal's thoughts also on it. To understand, sort of your approach to curating this series, I remember Ritesh's exhibition, the one prior to this. He's a city photographer, he's worked for publications, as has Tejal. So I'm curious to understand, is there sort of a binding thought to bringing this particular set of photographers together, or, are you looking purely at the individual practice of each of them?
I'm actually interested in how every art practice, whether it's photography or painting or sculpture or film, in this moment tends to be expansive, tends to investigate itself, tends to connect with other forms of articulation. So as far as photography is concerned, I've just been fascinated in the last decade or so at how very varied its forms are. It could assume a more classical kind of perspective, but it could also be extremely democratic in the way in which today we are all photographers with our phones. So there's that expansiveness. There's also a way in which there's a memoiristic turn in photography where it becomes part, especially in an exhibition context. It can take the form of, it's one part of a series of articulations which include writing sometimes. So there's text, there's image, there's a kind of open-endedness to it. So I just wanted to bear witness to these various possibilities. And I'm fascinated by the adjacency of practices, how someone who might be a photojournalist in one part of their lives also has another quest, which I don't think is a polar opposite. I think there are very strong connections between these two or more things that someone can do.
No, absolutely, and that's quite interesting. I think Tejal and I were talking about this earlier, about how photography is, it's a formidable practice in itself, but also, it's such a great medium for artists to explore, and we've seen so much of that, being explored creatively. But with Tejal's work, and I wanted to dive into that a little bit. Mrs. Godrej spoke about how there was this extensive set of images that the two of you went through. So would you just like to tell me a little bit about the process of why these particular images, and also because there's so much that you've shot in the past, and this is sort of handpicked from that. Did you really resonate with what you did earlier? Was that part of your thought process, or how did that work?
So to answer your question about if it resonated with my earlier practice, I think it definitely did, because these are images which have been shot over 15 years. And they've actually come from the space of assignments which I did while I was with a newspaper or a magazine. So it's really come from that space. But I think it's also different in the sense that I think the way I look at this work now is different. So I'm using the same set of pictures, but to say different things. So I think that has changed over time. And I think that is something that I learned when I did a workshop with Anita Singh in 2018. And I what I learned there was this language to kind of use to look at your own work and to make sense of it in a very different way. So this work actually stemmed from an Instagram post which I put up, where I tried to explore the color blue. And I remember the first time when I met Ranjit, to kind of show him all of my work. I also showed him this one, and I also told him that, this is an idea that I have. I don't know really where I'm going with it or what I'm doing with it. But the interesting thing that had actually happened was that I had actually come across this book, which is Rebecca Solnit's A Field Guide to Getting Lost. And what I actually saw in the book resonated with the way I thought about blue and I thought about my own work. So I would say that, of course, that there has been a change, but then I think it's the same set of eyes looking at the images. So in that sense, it's same but different.
And then to sort of pick up on that idea of the same set of eyes, but now you've taken this body of work and you've put it into a gallery space in a very, very different context. And you actually wrote something lovely this morning about, the viewing experience and what it's like to see people look at your work also in a gallery. What are some of the things that, as this exhibition has kind of gone on, what are some of the things that you've noticed in the way people have been responding to the work? Is it different from what you intended it to be, for instance?
Definitely, because it's been a surprise to me, because I think a lot of this work went up only on a digital platform, which is online, mostly on Instagram. So, for example, I don't think it's possible to look, but there's an image of dead fish in ice. And I had only ever seen that on a screen. And suddenly, when it's a big, large print, everything about it sort of changes. So I think that's what's happened. And I think we're also very used to looking at work on screens. So when you sort of suddenly have larger prints and you're looking at one print at a time, not scrolling through it, the kind of impact which it really makes on you is very different. Of course, there have been fascinating insights and perspectives, like even the kind of thing that you said the first time that you were here, which was quite lovely. So I think when you shoot, you really look at a particular thing, or it's a moment that kind of grabs your attention and you shoot. But it's also lovely to really bring people to a space and to have them interact with your work, and then to use that as a segue into a conversation, which is about photography, but which is also about life and which is about so much more. So I think that's what's really happened, because there was this kid who came, there's an image which I made in Baroda. And he saw that picture and he said that, is this shot here? Because there's also a small map which says where which image has been made. And he said, is this in so and so place? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, my granddad lives close by, and this took me back to my summer vacations in his house. And I thought that was lovely too, in a way, because it is, in a way, it's a journey that images can help you make, or art can help you make, to really take you someplace else, to really open up that, that space for you to really travel, move. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think, what you mentioned about, a child responding to a photograph, what I've sort of, and this is my fascination with photography as a practice, is I find it the most accessible way to engage with art, right? And then to come back to what you said, it is the most accessible, but yet, sort of not yet accepted in a certain way. So I just wanted to, get your thoughts on that. Why do you think we're still here in 2023, where, we have great photographers coming out of India, putting, our name on the map, and, there's a Museum of Art and Photography, there's Museo Camera, there are quite a few initiatives now, but somehow it feels like it's not enough. It's not there yet.
I'm not quite sure I have an explanation for this, unless it's some ghost of this idea of the original and irreducible artwork. And I think that's something that still haunts viewing habits. There's some notion that a certain kind of artwork is unique, for instance, a painting, but that photography or any of the graphic arts, because they're editioned, because they exist in multiples, that somehow that reduces their originality in value. But I'm not sure if this logic still holds in a digital age where we're much more used to things existing in multiple versions and virtuality. So I have no explanation for why there isn't a more dedicated patronage for photography.
I mean, I think also for younger collectors, it's a great way, to sort of start acquiring art. But then, as you build your collection, it seems to be a little bit of an afterthought, if I may, which is unfortunate, right? I mean, what do you think, Tejal?
I think it is the accessibility of it. I think the fact that, we all own phones and we all have cameras, and I feel like that really makes one feel that you can, but it's really not that. And I think the question, which again, Denita also asks, that it's a very vital, very crucial question that, with the fact that photography now is so accessible, who are the photographers of the future? Who are these guys and how are they going to make images and who are they? As in, is everyone a photographer just because we have a camera and we can shoot? Or is the thought behind the image important? What we're doing with the image, is that important? So I feel it is the accessibility, but also I feel maybe spaces like these where you have conversations and where you also, because a photographer, unfortunately, is somebody who's always sort of in the shadows doing their work, because, I always think about the fact that that is a quality that you need to have, I always used to think of myself in Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility, and wished I had that, so that I can just kind of be by myself and get these moments where, which you can only see and not probably shoot. But I think what happens is that it is the difference between being visible and then being invisible, and I think both are equally important. So photographers are usually also probably just seen as somebody who is just, there. So yes, of course.
Actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking back to the generations of photographers I've known. When I started writing on the arts, which this morning I realized with a shock was 35 years ago, the scene was dominated by very, very visible photographers. Raghu Rai, Raghuber Singh, Ashwin Mehta. Some of these people have passed into legend, others have been slightly forgotten. But there was no notion that they were, or Mittar Bedi, who's completely underregarded.
Homai Varyawala,
Homai Varyawala, who then came to the fore a little later when her work was fully recognized. But the fact is that these were photographers who had a particular project and a purpose and a sense of their art. Then there's the whole generation with Dayanita Singh, Ram Rahman, Ketki Sheth, Sunita Raporwala. Thinking of these people, and with them there's another unfolding of how to make photography relevant and how to pursue it with a certain artistic purpose. And I sometimes think of that generation as being much more ethnographically driven. And they tend to work in projects. What is it that they're bearing witness to? Is it the neighborhood, the community, the city? Or in some cases, I think back, for instance, to Ketki's amazing twin spotting series, for instance. What is the conceptual thematic that guides your work? And now we have this other turn, and there I think of Dayanita turning to the book as an object. I mean, how do you, it's not only a question of who the photographers of the future are, but it's really what is the photographic medium going to be like?
Yeah. No, absolutely. What is the photographic medium going to look like? Where do we find the photographers of tomorrow? How do we nurture them so that we're able to, look at or sort of push them creatively? I think, what you mentioned earlier about everybody being a photographer and then, having social media to sort of
One should say everybody thinking they're
thinking of their that's right, thinking they're a photographer and using social media, etc. So just curious also to kind of unpack the idea of finding and nurturing new talent today. So where, for instance, do you look for new talent? Where, as a curator, do you look for talent today?
I'm going to be cheeky and say I look on Instagram. But that's not true, strictly. I mean, if you asked me this earlier on, and I kind of sort of bypassed that question. So let me come back to it in this context. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here is to bear witness to this diversity of practice and where it might be found. So with Ritesh, it was looking at a photojournalist who, in the course of his work, has also been possessed by quirky, oddball preoccupations. So that exhibition was about a very particular thematic, the afterlife of the political poster, but linked to the everydayness of his practice, which comes through in a book. So again, it's this question of how are you pushing up against the constraints of photojournalism and what new forms are you producing? With Naveen Kishore, it was very different. Naveen Kishore is known as a pioneering and amazing publisher. Yeah. And he's a master of stagecraft and has been involved with theater. His photography has often not been noticed. It's increasingly being noticed now. It's absolutely marvelous. But what we wanted to do here was to look at a set of photographs that had never before been shown in an exhibition context. They'd only appeared in an issue of the Seagull Theatre Quarterly. Photographs made during a visit to Manipur, and amazing black and whites, actors in rehearsal or in production, and they were going to be presented for the first time to an audience that didn't have that context outside that historical moment. So where do you look? It could be the pages of a journal that was published 25 years ago, or in contemporary work, or as with Tejal's work, through the 180 or more images that we went through. And at various points, there were kind of rehearsals for the exhibition. There was a body of work that had to do with her time in the Mediterranean, which had a very strong chromatic presence, for instance. Another set of works which had to do with habitations that have been abandoned. But eventually I thought there should be some recognition of where the photographer thinks she is at this point. So I think as we came to this exhibition, it became important to me curatorially to get a sense of where you feel you are on your journey, Tejal. So that tended to pivot around notions of interiority and expanse as twins in some way, the presence of blue. And yet there are traces and tinges of all these other concerns as well, you know, the afterlife of habitation or latent presence. All of these other concerns are also present, and they animate this particular set of 27 photographs.
So, Tejal, I just want to ask you, where are you? No, why I say this is because very interesting point of your practice. You know, you've worked for publications, you've had all this material, and sometimes I feel, and this is your debut showing. So sometimes I think about it as, is this sort of a culmination of things, but then it feels also like a beginning of things, right? So a culmination of work, right? So which one, or where are you?
So I would definitely say that I think where I'm at would be, I think I am somebody who is intrigued by ideas which are abstract and which really are not really removed from your everyday world. These are images which have been taken in very physical, real worlds. It's not like there's some studio where I've created something, or it is what we all see. So, but what do you take away from that? So I feel like I have always been someone who's been seeing that. But I think now is the time when I'm actually probably acknowledging that to myself too. And working with it a lot more, I would say. And I don't think this is, of course, it's a culmination of this show, but I mean, of this, I don't think it's a culmination of this work actually, because we also said that it's 2008 to ongoing, so definitely. And I realized while in the course of this, I mean, kind of looking through my work and seeing what really fits here, that I realized that there were patterns which emerged, and that probably this is how I look, this is how I think, this is how I see. So that's also, I would say, a more subconscious process, and something that you can't really consciously control, because if one thinks like that and one is drawn to certain themes, and that's what pulls you again and again, then that's what it is. And I feel like, as Ranjit said, we had the option of going with the abandoned homes, which was very structured, very documentary work, because it was work on the chawls and things like that. It was this abandoned village in Greece, and they would have probably made for a very strong show as well. But we both thought that there was something here, and also the fact that, with Blue and with an idea as abstracted as this, you really don't know where you are. So it's really fun, because you're really operating in a way from instinct and from your gut. So you're responding to what really stirs you. And I think the edit has been that way too. I mean, Ranjit would be in a better place to really talk about it. But even for me, when I kind of when I shortlisted the images to show him, the 180 images every time I would meet him, I think it would be...
Every round of 180 images.
I thought it was 80. We've gone to 180 now. Okay. So I think it was from that space, and I think both of us were in a way on the same page, that they all felt like that. And then from that, of course, it was his expertise that he kind of culled 27 out of them, which would make for a stronger show, because this is my first show. I have never really worked in a space like this before. So for me, it was a learning experience to really see how images can work in a space, in a physical space like that, because as a photo editor, I've always edited for photo features and for, if I'm trying to work on a book. So that works very differently.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the elephant in the room when you talk about photography, which is social media, and the idea of everything fitting into a square. In the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a surge of photographers doing print sales, especially on Instagram, etc. And they have found their audience. They're able to, connect with the people they want to speak to. People are supporting them. So I wonder, in an age like that, at a time like that, what is sort of the importance of the gallery then, where your Instagram feed today is a gallery. You have captions where you're curating shows almost on it, right? So what further dimension, for example, does a gallery add to this experience?
There might be 2 or 3 ways of... It's an important and complex question. But for one thing, even while social media gives you a certain illusion of collective and participatory experience, it is intensely alienating and fragmenting. It's not a popular view, obviously, but it allows for a certain level of discussion, but just the temporality of social media means that I'm not going to reduce it to like or not like, but it's just a quality of time that you can't invest in it. So what a gallery does is to create a space of sociality, in a way. It allows you to spend time looking at the images, and time. I think temporality is the big difference, and scale, and also the way in which you could construct curatorially a certain exhibition narrative. How do these photographs succeed each other? What are the assonances, the affinities? Even without a concrete and explicit narrative, how are you being led from one space to another? I mean, this exhibition is actually structured in 3 spaces, for instance, which you might or not get, or you might just negotiate the space intuitively. But there are patterns which you can encrypt in an exhibition. What social media does, on the other hand, is to give you a very quick shuffle of images. And as you yourself said, there's a format there. So even as you think this gives you great freedom, you're actually being constrained in certain ways.
No, I'm definitely, one to support physical viewing experiences. Tejal, what do you think as a photographer? You've been sharing your images as well. When you're making a photograph today, are you thinking about that square?
It's interesting that you say square because I think the only format that I can think of in a square is, apart from Instagram, is the Hasselblad. So, but, yeah, so that, but I think we also did chat about this at some point of time, and I do feel that a gallery is important in a way because as Ranjit said, it is a place where you can come, interact with the image, interact with the artist, have conversations like these. Because it's not just that, it's not just the image, it's also more than that. It's it's conversations around it.
It's the community viewing.
It's the community, yeah, exactly. It's the community viewing experience. But I also feel like, were you interested in actually buying a print and taking it home? Would you rather look at it on an Instagram feed, or would you actually want to see the actual print in all its beauty? And
No, and also, your work especially, when it's blown up to this size, the viewing experience is entirely, different.
Yes.
And I think, of course, that was your curatorial intervention, because I've seen these images on Instagram and, it doesn't do any of it justice, honestly. It just sort of takes you in, especially with this size. But, to come back to that, still, as a photographer, you do know that you have an audience there. So, and it does need to fit into those dimensions. So does that matter at all today when you're thinking about it? Or does it happen subconsciously?
I don't think I'm really thinking about the audience when I'm making the images, or yeah, but I do probably think about it in the format of how am I going to put it out. So if it's going up as a post, then of course my edit is according to that. So, and even in that, which is what I was trying to do. So if there are, because Instagram lets you put like say 10 images. So then I pick the 10 and then I also pick what comes first.
So creating a
second,
narrative
third.
then.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am. But then that's just me. And I think it really depends upon what is it that you're trying to say. Because if you're sharing images of a party, then I don't know if that could be interesting too. There could be a narrative there as well. But so it really depends upon what is it that you're trying to say. If you're trying to say many things with 10 images, 10 different things, or if you're trying to say one specific thing with 10 images. So Instagram is a very interesting space, I would say, because, and sadly, or whatever it is, I think that's also a space which has democratized things. So if there are people who are making prints and doing print sales, and it's fantastic because I feel like photography is a tough profession. Not everyone gets a great job in this field. So it's fantastic if you can actually put your work out, if people view your work there and buy the print. So there is that, but it can be probably a point of departure for other things, and it can be a starting point for other stuff. Like the fact that I put out my images at times to really kind of do a test, to kind of test it, and then really get a reaction and be like, okay, does this work here? And then maybe if that set works, then it could become a show, or it could become a book, or it could become anything. So it's also testing ground in a way. So, yeah.
But does it, so a lot of art is, and particularly patronizing art, buying art is based on exclusivity. It's based on, the fact that only you are able to view that, right? So does it really, having your images out there, does it take away from your practice? Does it take away from the experience that someone else, the person who's buying it, might have, for example? And also, do you think about, putting it out there and then copyright and plagiarism? So what I'm getting at is it is it detrimental to a photographer's practice to put so much work out there, or do you think it sort of has its positives and one should engage?
Um, I think in a way it makes me happy that it breaks that, because it's like it's nice to really kind of have your work out there, and so I like the fact that it's accessible to whoever wants to really see it. But at the same time, yes, if you were to buy work and to kind of put it up in your house, it's really the choice that the buyer needs to make between being able to view the image on a screen as opposed to having it in their homes and physically there and become a part of because it's a very different environment. Sure, if it makes you happy to go every day and see the same image on your screen, then sure. But if you do want to bring it home, if you want to kind of make it a part of your everyday, then that's a call that the person who's buying the art needs to make.
And we spoke about the sizing of the images as an intervention to how it would look different physically versus digitally. What are some of the other ways to make the gallery experience, sort of a 2.0 version for somebody who's seeing images on a screen, but how is that experience different in a physical space? How can you make it different rather in a physical space?
I mean, we've touched on some of these things already. Scale is one, where you're not in command of the image, but the image can confront you and surprise you in a certain way. That's important. Then, of course, sociality, community, we talked about this. Time, the time of viewing, the intensity of encounter with the work, and possibilities such as these, where you can actually discuss the image, its contexts, the practice, and it's a much more invitational gesture. And I think all that is possible in a gallery context. And also, to kind of touch on something that came up just now, I think we're also in the age of intersecting publics. Chris Anderson wrote this book a long time ago. What was it called? The Long Tail, where we've left behind the idea of a single undifferentiated public or viewership, and everybody has their following and their particular market somewhere along the long tail. But the gallery offers you a possibility of bringing all of these otherwise fragmented and separate publics together. So I think it could also be a venue for the intersection of different publics. I think that's certainly a possibility that it allows for.
I agree. So I'm just going to sum this up with a question to the two of you, both of you. If we spoke about, how we can support photography as a practice far more. So if we were to create a bit of a blueprint for an organization or a collective or, something that would support photography and younger photographers, for example, what might that look like? What are some of the things, we could be doing now?
I think funding, definitely, because I feel like it's important for the photographer to feel that they can really be doing whatever. I mean, they could be paying rent too. I mean, yeah, it's really that, and I think this is also something that we've spoken about with the Anita, where it's like when you get these scholarships and when you get all of these things, it's not important to really know what you're doing with that, because that could help you work better. If you have a roof over your head, or if you have 3 meals a day, and if you have a decent enough camera, that is all aiding you to really go out and make that image. So I feel that definitely, I think, but that's the starting point. But at the same time, I feel like it's education, it's exposure, it's platforms like these, which are very, very important. Yeah.
I would tend to think also of institutional frameworks. For some reason, this is notably absent in Bombay. You know, when I think
Bombay especially.
yeah, when I think of Bangalore, you mentioned MAP. Delhi and Gurgaon have institutions devoted to photography. Goa is emerging as a strong nucleus. There are, in other places, there are very strong and well-organized communities of photographers, and there are institutions. In Bombay, for instance, I'm not even sure it's active anymore. There used to be the Piramal Center for Photography. It was, yes, above the experimental theater at the NCPA. But God bless their souls, but they really were an old boys club, even at the best of times. They never have the impression that they were vastly open to diverse practitioners. But the downside of all this is also that there's a chronic lack of institutional memory. There's a lot of folklore about photography among practitioners. But you really need an institution that can embody that history in fairly clear terms. So you see what's gone before, and whether you're simply reinventing the wheel or adding as a contributor to a history that's already there. And we just tend to depend on the odd occasional exhibition or the retrospective.
Absolutely.
There has to be a much more continuous sense of this history of photography in India. I mean, there are institutions that are doing great work, but it simply has to be much more readily available to practitioners and also to this emerging public for photography.
Well, this is the starting point, and thank you again, Mrs. Godrej, for giving us this platform.